There is a place the world forgot. An island adrift in the heart of the Indian Ocean, where time once stood still. Where creatures wandered without fear, as if the word predator had never been spoken. In that untouched paradise, a strange bird moved with quiet dignity. Heavy, awkward, flightless, yet sovereign. Its name, the Dodo. But beware, this is no simple tale of extinction. It is a dark fable about how forgetfulness, arrogance, and the endless hunger of mankind can erase entire worlds as swiftly as a candle is snuffed out by a breath of wind. Now I ask you, how could a bird that never knew fear disappear so completely, leaving behind almost nothing? Was it only the hunter that sealed its fate? Or is there something deeper, more haunting beneath its vanishing? Something that still whispers in the corners of our dying world. Take heed. What begins as the story of a bird becomes a reflection of our own choices. And the answer to the mystery of the Dodo is not what you think. If we want to understand the Dodo, we must first tear the map off the wall. Because it's not just about an island, it is a natural laboratory. A scenario where evolution was unleashed without witnesses. Mauritius Island, a volcanic jewel that emerged about 8 million years ago in the middle of the Indian Ocean, more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest coast. A place so remote that for eons, no land creature managed to set foot on its soil. Only the wind, the waves, and the wings brought life to its shores, and here the first paradox occurs. The Dodo, that bird that did not fly, was born from ancestors that did fly through the skies. Robust pigeons, tireless travelers, that one day arrived in Mauritius dragged by storms. They found an Eden without predators. They didn't need to fly. They didn't need to escape. And when the urgency fades, nature responds with a relentless scalpel. Wings that do not fly become shorter, muscles that do not run atrophy. Absolute freedom creates comfort, and comfort eventually carves new shapes. The Dodo was born from a biological paradox. To survive, he stopped running away. To prosper, he abandoned heaven. This feathered colossus could reach a meter in height and weigh up to 15 kilos. Its wings were small, almost decorative, and its tail was a simple tuft of curly feathers. Its powerful, curved beak was the only relic of a lineage that once migrated between continents. Their legs were strong, designed for walking long distances, in search of food. Its blue-gray plumage camouflaged it among the chiaroscuro of the forest. And your home? Imagine it. Ebony forests, mangroves teeming with life, plains dotted with palm trees. An ecosystem where trees like the tambalacoke, the so-called dodo tree, depended on this bird to disperse their seeds. Because yes, when the dodo devoured its fruits, only its digestive system was capable of wearing down the hard shells that protected the seeds, allowing them to germinate after being expelled. The dodo was not just an inhabitant. He was a gardener of the forest, an invisible link in a chain that could not afford to break. But this is where the story begins to tighten, like the string of a forgotten lute. Could an animal that never knew the urge to flee, that trusted in the eternal stability of its island, resist the arrival of a cataclysm? And when I say cataclysm, I'm not talking about a meteorite or a volcanic eruption. I'm talking about us. In 1598, the history of the Dodo changed forever. A group of Dutch sailors landed in Mauritius. They were part of a fleet heading towards the Spice Islands. They were looking for routes, rest, and supplies. They found something else, an unexplored paradise. Imagine it with them, the sticky humidity, the lush vegetation, and suddenly, huge, clumsy birds that did not flee, that they approached out of simple curiosity without understanding the danger that came disguised as humanity. In the records of these first explorers, there appear descriptions that oscillate between mockery and fascination. They called the bird Valgvogel, the nauseous bird, for the flavor of its underappreciated meat. Others saw it as a grotesque oddity, as if the island had decided to make a caricature of a bird just to baffle visitors. But the most important thing was not noted in their diaries. They did not understand, they could not understand yet, that they had just introduced the island the seed of your own ruin, rats, pigs, monkeys, and humans. Predators that did not respect the sacred slowness of Mauricio, species that would see the eggs of the Dodo as an irresistible feast. Now go back with me to that opening scene. Do you remember the Dodo walking, solemn, without fear? Imagine now the shadows of rats sliding between the roots, the teeth of pigs sniffing nests, the sailors' bonfires lit on the coast. The island that manufactured impossible things had just opened the door to collapse, and you might think, didn't he adapt? Didn't he try to defend himself? Didn't he have time to learn fear? I'll tell you about it in the next chapter, because when the speed of change exceeds the speed of adaptation, tragedy becomes inevitable. And in that clash between ancestral trust and modern predation, the Dodo never stood a chance. In natural history, there is a type of enemy that does not need to show fangs or deploy claws. You just need exist in the wrong place, at the exact moment. For the Dodo, that enemy arrived on 4 legs, with a wet snout and curious look. First were the wheel. Little stowaways who traveled in the holds of Dutch ships, invisible among the barrels of rum and boxes of spices. When they landed, they found a banquet that no island had ever offered. Nests full of eggs, intact, unattended. The Dodo, like many birds on isolated islands, did not need to protect its nests. There was no predator that threatened their eggs. But now, each clutch of 3 or 4 eggs became dinner for dozens of hungry rats. Then came the pigs. Introduced by sailors as a future food source, pigs adapted with brutal efficiency. Their sense of smell detected hidden nests. Their hooves moved the soil, and their jaws crushed shells with ease. And as if that were not enough, the monkeys brought from Asia, intelligent and opportunistic animals. They also discovered the delicacy of eggs and defenseless young. The Dodo was surrounded. Now think for a moment about the magnitude of the change. A bird that had evolved for millions of years without any fear, suddenly faced with invisible, fast, nocturnal enemies. How does a species learn fear when it never needed it? How does one generation teach the next a danger they don't understand? But this doesn't end here. Because He-Man, that creature that walks with fire in one hand and maps in the other, was not content to upset the balance with rats and pigs. They cut down the forests. They needed wood for their ships, to build temporary shelters, to make charcoal. The trees fell, the roots were torn, and with them the home of the Dodo and many other endemic species disappeared. The habitat was shrinking, like a rope tightened around the neck of a condemned man. And as if hunting and destruction were not enough, mockery was another nail in the Dodo's coffin. Sailors caught it easily, not only for food, although its meat was not appreciated, but for play. Chronicles of the time describe grotesque scenes. Men chasing the Dodos, hitting them with sticks for fun. Dodos races organized on the beaches. Birds captured and taken alive to the wineries as a simple curiosity. For Europeans, the Dodo was neither a sacred animal nor a respectable creature. It was a feathered joke. A living caricature of what happens when the need to fight is eliminated. However, here comes the cruelest irony. Although the Dodo was sighted by dozens of expeditions between 1598 and 1662, it was never studied with real rigor. Their habits, feeding, and reproduction were never systematically documented. It was hunted, exported, exhibited in cages, but no one thought it could disappear. Because until that moment, extinction was not a concept that inhabited the minds of Europeans. The world seemed inexhaustible. The animals seemed infinite. And then, like a candle that goes out in a room where no one is looking, the dodo disappeared. In less than a century after first contact, the last references to living dodos faded. There was no precise date. There was no last photograph nor a last lovingly preserved stuffed specimen. They simply stopped seeing each other. One morning someone entered the forest, and the silence was absolute. Now, stop for a moment. Think about this. How does an entire species disappear without anyone really noticing? What does that say about us, and what price we are willing to pay for not listening to the whispers of disappearance until the echo is all that remains? In the next, I will take you to the shadows of oblivion, because the physical disappearance of the dodo is only half of the story. What comes next is even more disturbing, the disappearance of his memory. And believe me, that's where the questions get more uncomfortable. There are deaths that happen once, and there are others that occur twice. The first, when the body disappears. The second, when no one remembers it existed. The dodo was not only extinct from the earth, was erased from the human mind. In the years after his physical disappearance, something even stranger began to happen. The history of the dodo was unraveling, like a forgotten scroll exposed to the rain. The bones disintegrated quickly in the humid climate of Mauritius. The few skins and stuffed specimens sent to Europe were damaged, lost, or discarded. The written chronicles were vague, contradictory, and often treated the bird as a simple travel anecdote, not as an animal worthy of study. The science of the time did not understand extinction. The idea that a creature could disappear forever clashed with the dominant view that all species created by God continued to exist in some remote corner, even if we did not see them. The dodo began to be seen like a myth, a fable, an exaggeration of drunken sailors. And here something fascinating happens. The history of the dodo began to mix with legend, like an echo that bounces off the walls of time and returns deformed. In the mid-17th and 18th centuries, naturalists, writers, and philosophers, they began to doubt the existence of the dodo. Some called it an invention, a fantastic creature similar to the griffin or the unicorn. Others believed that it was simply some kind of deformed, poorly described turkey. The dodo became a scientific ghost, a spectrum that appeared in scattered stories, imprecise engravings, and paintings that mixed imagination and reality. Let's think about this for a moment. In less than 100 years, a creature that walked, breathed, nested, and sang in the forests of Mauritius faded not only from nature, but from the collective mind. How many species have disappeared in the same way, without leaving a trace? How many of us have forgotten that they even existed? And yet, the dodo was not completely finished. Like an ember that refuses to die under the ashes, some small pieces survived. A skull in an Oxford museum, a couple of bones scattered in private collections, recorded in travel diaries forgotten in dusty libraries. It was then, in the 19th century, when archaeology and paleontology emerged as new sciences, with a voracious hunger to reconstruct the past. Scientists rediscovered ancient stories. Explorers traveled back to Mauritius to search for remains. Excavations began to reveal fragments of fossilized bones in the peat bogs of Mauritius, a swamp that hid a treasure buried for centuries. And little by little, like a puzzle recovered from a shipwreck, the figure of the dodo began to be reconstructed. It was no longer just an exotic anecdote or an absurd legend. It became symbol of an uncomfortable truth. The species, they could disappear forever, and the cause could be the human being. It was at this moment when the dodo took an unexpected leap from oblivion to popular culture. In 1865, Lewis Carroll immortalized the dodo in Alice in Wonderland, portraying him as an endearing and somewhat clumsy character. Curiously, Carroll whose real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, stammered. When he said his last name, it sounded Do Dodgson. That play on words, together with his fascination with the absurd and the forgotten, led the dodo to its eternal tale. From then on, the dodo revived as a cultural symbol. But here's the twist that few notice. He was resurrected as a metaphor for disappearance, not as a living species. It became a reminder, a permanent whisper. This is what happens when we don't pay attention. This is what happens when we believe something will be here forever. Now I want you to stop and feel the restlessness that is beginning to form. How many other current creatures are repeating the story of the dodo while we look the other way? Are we currently experiencing the next disappearance that our grandchildren will try to rebuild from the rubble? We will descend deeper. I will show you the hidden ecological role of the dodo, how his disappearance set off a chain reaction that forever altered Mauritius's ecosystem, and how the ghosts of the dodo still walk, invisible, on the land we walk on today, ready to find out. Sometimes the world stands not on giants, but on what seems insignificant. A tree that gives shade to thousands, an insect that pollinates without being seen, a bird that, with its heavy steps, maintains the balance of an entire forest. That bird was the dodo. When he disappeared, not only did one animal disappear, a master key that opened dozens of doors in the Mauritius ecosystem disappeared. And the most disturbing thing is that no one noticed it in time. Let's go back. Before the Portuguese ships cut the horizon with their taut sails, Mauritius was an untouched sanctuary, a laboratory of evolution suspended in time. The birds that arrived there, pigeons, parrots, herons, evolved without pressure from predators. And in that isolated context, an earth dove changed. She became bigger, heavier, more confident. Lost the ability to fly because I didn't need it. Over time, that dove evolved into what we call dodo today. But the dodo was not just a rare bird. He was an ecological engineer, like elephants in Africa or beavers in North America. His diet was crucial. Large fruits, hard seeds, fallen fruits that no other animal could consume on that island. Its strong beak and adapted stomach, they processed those seeds, weakened their outer covering, and dispersed them away from the mother tree. Some plant species, they depended exclusively on the dodo to germinate. Without it, its seeds could not break through its hardness and would remain inert, unable to give new life. There is one tree in particular that holds this story like a forgotten chest, El Tambalacoque, Sideroxylon grandiflorum, a robust tree with heavy wood, whose seeds seem to resist everything, except the extinction of its disperser. After the disappearance of the dodo, the Tambalacoques stopped germinating. For centuries, botanists found old trees, but no young specimen. It was as if the species were condemned to aging without heirs, a silent generation, trapped in a biological limbo. An ecologist named Stanley Temple in the 70s proposed a bold idea. What if the Tambalacoque seeds only germinated after passing through the dodo's digestive tract? With that hypothesis, he tried to simulate the process using domestic turkeys, birds with similar organs. The result was shocking. Some seeds germinated. It was not conclusive proof, but it opened a portal of understanding that until then, no one had crossed. The dodo had been a gardener without equal. When disappearing, not only did the bird die, a cycle of forest regeneration died. The chain that linked fruits, trees, insects, and other animals that depended on those plants died. But here it is the darkest warning. It didn't just happen in Mauritius. Today we know that every time a species disappears, especially a seed disperser, the entire ecosystem breaks down. It's like removing a cornerstone from an arch. The others seem stable, until everything collapses. Now, breathe for a moment and look around. How many modern dodos are we ignoring? Bats that pollinate cacti, fish that keep coral algae clean, birds that disperse seeds in tropical rainforests. The dodo effect is still alive, invisible, silent, and devastating. As science reconstructed the ecological role of the dodo, another question began to take shape, like a shadow behind a mirror. Could this bird have avoided its fate? Was its extinction inevitable? Or was there a tipping point where something could have been done? We will enter them on the exact causes of its extinction, not just the obvious ones, like hunting, but the least known, biological invasions, diseases, and a clash between worlds that sealed the fate of the dodo, and that could be repeating itself today. Do you want to know when, how, and why exactly was the moment when the dodo crossed the threshold of no return? See you in the next chapter. Sometimes catastrophes don't strike like lightning. They are not a roar that splits the sky in two. They are a trickle, a dull creak, a weight that accumulates until the branch breaks. This was the extinction of the dodo. For centuries, the dodo had lived without predators. His muscles forgot the urge to flee. His instinct rusted like an old lock. When the humans arrived, they arrived with everything the island had never known: axes, fire, hunger, and even worse, invisible companions. First were the Portuguese, sailors, and then the Dutch, at the beginning of the 17th century. Mauritius became an obligatory stopover on the Indian Ocean routes. The sailors went ashore with only one idea: survival. They needed meat, water, and wood. El Dodo, trusting and naive, he approached without fear. I didn't understand that those hands had traps and knives. Its meat, although reported as not very tasty by some chroniclers, it was an easy source of protein. But direct hunting, it was just one of the blades. The worst came in the holds of the ships. Rats, pigs, monkeys, and dogs landed without permission or control, invisible invaders. While the dodo tried to continue with its routine, the eggs in their nests were plundered by rats and pigs. A single pig could dig up and devour dozens of eggs in a matter of hours. Entire generations were never born, the introduced goats and deer. They competed for food and devastated the vegetation, the habitat that the dodo knew it was crumbling under his feet. Without food, without offspring, without shelter, the population collapsed. And then there is the invisible enemy par excellence: the diseases. With humans and their animals came bacteria and viruses for which the fauna of Mauritius had no defenses. A simple cold, a fungus, a bacteria transmitted by a domestic bird could wipe out entire populations. Avian diseases are likely will contribute to decimating to the weakened dodos. There is a chilling detail. In less than a century since the first European contact, the dodo had disappeared. It is estimated that the last confirmed observation was in 1662. A creature that had evolved over millions of years, it was eradicated in less than 3 human generations. But there is something more disturbing. At the time, no one seemed to notice. There were no ecological funerals. There were no cries of alarm. The concept of extinction did not even exist as we understand it today. In fact, for more than 2 centuries, the dodo was treated as a myth. Some naturalists doubted that it had really existed. The stories were vague, the bones few, the illustrations contradictory. The dodo died twice, one physically and another in oblivion. Only in the 19th century, thanks to scientific expeditions and rediscovery of fossils, the dodo returned to collective memory. But it was too late. His story became a symbol, a warning, a mirror. Now I want you to stop for a moment. Think about this. How long will it take for this scenario to repeat itself today? With accelerated deforestation, invasive species, illegal trade, climate change, are we experiencing the beginning of new invisible extinctions? Let's explore something that many forget: the cultural and symbolic dimension of the dodo. How did it go from a forgotten bird to become an icon of the fragility of life? Why is his image still alive in books, movies, and songs, while his body lies missing? You will be surprised to discover how an extinct animal can continue to shape the way we see the world. There are bodies that disappear, and there is ideas that are never erased. The dodo became extinct, that's a fact. But something in his story: he did not die with his bones. His flesh died, but his symbol was born. Imagine this: a clumsy, stocky creature, unable to fly, trusting to the point of naivety, annihilated by human arrogance. Sound familiar? In some corner of our collective mind, the dodo is no longer just a bird. Became metaphor, a stinging reminder of our ability to destroy what we do not understand. For centuries, the figure of the dodo, it floated between myth and skepticism. Some thought it was just a legend exaggerated by drunk sailors. But with the arrival of the 19th century and the fever of naturalistic science, the pieces began to fit. Between 1865 and 1868, George Clark, a school teacher in Mauritius, discovered a site of dodo bones in the Pantano of Mauritius. Finally, irrefutable evidence. The remains confirmed that not only had there existed, but his story was more tragic than he had imagined. From here, the dodo, he was resurrected not as an animal, but as a cultural symbol. Lewis Carroll, in his Immortal Alice in Wonderland, 1865, included the dodo as a character. An eccentric bird that organizes an absurd race to dry. Why did Carroll include it? Many believe that it was a car parody. Carroll, whose real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, compete, and when pronouncing his last name he said something like Dodo Dodgson. The dodo became his alter ego. Since then, the figure of the dodo infiltrated art, literature, music, and cinema. It appears in video games, cartoons, children's books, and even on postage stamps. It became synonymous with obsolescence, of that which disappears without remedy. Phrases like, as dead as a dodo. They entered the English language to denote the unrecoverable, but also other readings began to emerge deeper and more uncomfortable. The dodo not only symbolized extinction, but innocence betrayed. The brutal clash between pure nature and voracious civilization, between the ancient balance and the emergence of progress. At this point, it is impossible not to make a parenthesis. How many modern dodos are we making right now? Let's think about species that today walk a tightrope: the Javan rhinoceros, the vaquita porpoise, the Sumatran tiger. Will they be the next nostalgic icons of a repentant humanity? But let's go back. At the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st, the image of the dodo was also adopted by ecological movements, became unintentional mascot of environmental awareness, a banner that remembered the consequences of excessive human invasion. Museums such as the Natural History Museum in London, the Laodicea Museum in Mauritius, and private collections exhibit replicas and fossils that continue to attract millions of visitors. It's not curiosity about a bird, it's existential morbidity. It is the need to look at ourselves in the mirror of the dodo and ask ourselves, how did we let this happen? In the digital age, the story of the dodo has gained a new dimension. Memes, documentaries, 3D reconstructions, animations. His figure traveled faster and further than ever. What was once limited to a tiny island in the Indian Ocean, now it is global emotional heritage. But wait, there is one last twist. With modern advances in cloning and gene editing, some scientists have asked, what if we could bring back the dodo? What if the creature we extinguished through ignorance? Could I walk on the sand of Mauritius again? We will take you into this fascinating territory, the theories and experiments to resurrect the dodo. Is it an act of scientific justice, or are we playing gods with the ruins of our mistakes? Get ready, because this is where history meets science, fiction, and ethical questions become more acute than ever. The history of the dodo could have been frozen in the melancholy of the past. It could be just that, a warning, a dusty whisper in the museums. But science, that eternal usurper of limits, he doesn't know the word impossible. In the last decade, a concept that previously belonged to science fiction novels has taken a fearful step towards reality. De-extinction. Clone extinct species. Resurrect what we thought was lost. Bring back the dodo. It is not a mere laboratory game. It's a philosophical dilemma disguised as technology. Beth Shapiro, an evolutionary geneticist at the University of California, has led studies that sequenced the DNA of the dodo from bone remains. Their findings confirmed what we already suspected. The closest living relative of the dodo is the Nicobar pigeon. Can you imagine? Of the dove that flutters on the islands of Southeast Asia, to a colossus that walked through the forests of Mauritius. With the tools of CRISPR gene editing, the theory is simple, although the execution is monumental. Modify the genome of the current pigeon to insert DNA fragments from the dodo. In essence, rewriting life. But here the question is no longer can we, but must. Would bringing back the dodo be an act of redemption, or an arrogance greater than that which extinguished it? Proponents argue that restoring lost species could repair damaged ecosystems. That returning the dodo to Mauritius would be returning its missing piece to the ecological puzzle. But the skeptics, and they are not few, whisper something else. The world has changed. Mauritius is no longer the same. Where would the dodo return to? To a paradise, or to a zoo? Besides, would it really be a dodo, or alone a genetic chimera, an artificial shadow of something that can never be the same? And if this door opens, where do we stop? Woolly mammoth? Tasmanian tiger? Neanderthal man? We are at a microscopic step to revive extinct species, but to an ethical abyss to understand what that would really mean. The dodo, who one day walked innocently among the trees of Mauritius, today walk like a ghost by the frontiers of modern genetics. And here I leave you with a question. Is resurrecting the dodo an act of love, or a desecration disguised as science? In the next part, we will travel even further, not to the past, nor to the future, but to the mirror of the present. What does the history of the dodo teach us about current mass extinctions? Are we repeating the same cycle without realizing it? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the heavy footsteps of the dodo echoing through the damp undergrowth of Mauritius. Now, open your eyes and listen to the echoes of those footsteps in our present. Because the extinction of the dodo is not just a closed chapter, it is a prophecy in motion. In less than 400 years since its disappearance, we have replicated their tragedy over and over again, as if we were trapped in a cycle from which we do not know how to escape. Northern white, rhinoceros, baiji, delphine del Yangtze, Javan tiger, Spix's macaw, Napoleon fish, giant pinta tortoise. One by one, they fall. Not because of unavoidable natural disasters, but because of the same combination that annihilated the dodo: excessive hunting, habitat destruction, introduction of invasive species, and eternal human underestimation. He Living Planet Report. The World Wildlife Fund, WWF, estimates that in just 50 years we have lost 68% of the world's wild animal populations. And biological collapse that moves so fast that we don't even have time to process it emotionally. Do you remember how the dodo never learned to fear man? Today's fauna repeats that trust, but in a much more hostile scenario. The question is no longer whether there will be another mass extinction. The question is if we are already in it, and we have not yet accepted it. Edward O. Wilson, the famous biologist, did not hesitate to call her the sixth extinction, a wave of disappearances faster than any since the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs. And yet, little has changed in our perception. The dodo fell because he was too naive to adapt to the abrupt change. Do we, with all our intelligence, act so differently? He who forgets his history is condemned to repeat it, said Cicero. But what if the problem is not forgetting? What if the problem is that we remember and still we repeat? What did the dodo really teach us? That species disappear, or that disappearances always begin with a small indifference and end with irreversible silence? We will go to the emotional root. I will tell you how the dodo, despite its extinction, never disappeared from our culture, our mind, and our consciousness. Because sometimes extinct species don't die at all. They become eternal symbols and indelible warnings. The dodo disappeared, but it never left. It appears in books, paintings, movies, coins, and dreams. Was caricatured in Alice in Wonderland like that clumsy but endearing bird. He was immortalized as symbol of extinction itself, and it continues to nest discreetly in the collective human memory. Maybe that was what we didn't know, that some species, although physically annihilated, they become immortal on another plane, the one with warnings. The dodo is our consciousness with wings, a voice that does not fly but resonates. When you see an endangered species, when you hear of an ecosystem collapsing, when someone tells you that it's just an animal, remember the dodo. Remember what happens when it's too late. Because sometimes to protect the future, we need to listen to the echoes of the past.